Oh, hi there, and welcome to today's webinar on the BC Hydro Net Metering Update. My name is Ed Knaggs from HES VP, as well as in coordination with the BC Sustainable Energy Association. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them by typing them in on your control panel, and one of the moderators will pause me and ask the questions at any time or at the end of the webinar. So to jump right into things, first a little bit about HES PV. We've been a equipment supplier and PV system designer for quite a number of years in Canada. We're spread all around Canada, and that helps us when we start talking about net metering programs or net billing programs, because we get to look at all the other jurisdictions, see what's going on there, learn what the best practices is, and what are some of the things that don't work well for net metering. Where things are heading globally for PV, this is one of our marketing firms that supplies us global data on what's happening in the industry. And you can see the orange upward trending line there. That's the growth of systems installed each year. So in 2017, 95,000 megawatts of PV was installed in that year. And we're looking forward to that growth continuing into this year as well. A big part of this is you'll see the red line and blue dashed line there. That's the cost of PV. So since 2008 through to 2014, the price of PV has absolutely plummeted. That represents probably about a 90 to 95% drop in price. And prices do continue to go down, although we are on a much healthier path for the price reductions. But now living in this world of reduced prices has really made PV come to the forefront as a viable energy option. And here's one study done by Rocky Mountain Institute that pointed that out. And it shows that the myth of PV being too expensive is now definitely dead. And some examples are a 4.5 cent per kilowatt hour 3 megawatt system done in New Mexico, and a 3.6 cent per kilowatt hour done with storage. So those are some pretty big leaps for us in the industry and shows where we're at today. The other big reason we're seeing so much growth is the economic benefit of the job creation. It's a known number, 35 green jobs per megawatt. So when I showed you that earlier megawatts, what was installed in a year, that tells you what jobs were created due to the solar industry. It's quite a large number of jobs. And the other benefit is most of those jobs are around the installations. So it's growing jobs with regional diversification. So we're growing jobs in every region throughout BC because of the net metering program. So there might be jobs, all the way up in Prince George down to Victoria, then Vancouver, and all over. BC Hydro currently has two options for connecting solar systems to the grid. The standing offer program is currently on hold. There is the standing offer program and now a micro version of that. That's where you can connect up your PV system with your own meter through a BC Hydro contract to sell power back to the grid. We're going to focus on the other side, which is the net metering side. And that's where you're connecting your PV system to an existing meter and trying to offset your loads throughout the year. Here's a little bit of how that works. So if you had a PV system on your roof and you have loads going on during the day, and let's just say it's early in the morning, you're drawing about 700 watts in this example, and because it's only early morning, your system's only putting out 200 watts. You would still be drawing power in from the grid to help run the loads in your home, but you can draw in less power because the solar system is reducing the amount that you need to pull in from the grid. So you get a reduced amount that you need to pull in. Let's say the sun continues upward and your array is now producing lots. You're still running that load, so you still have that draw in your house. But now your solar array is producing more than what your load is consuming. You actually get to push the excess energy back out through your existing meter and out onto the grid and get a credit for that. BC Hydro has termed that outflows, and when it's coming back in, it's inflows. That's how the net metering looks at things. So this is a graphical look of a typical house with solar during the full course of a day. So starting to the far left is early, 5 a.m. Of course, the sun's not even up. Those are different loads in the house that are switching on and off. It might be heat, might be hot water, whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden at 7 a.m. just past, the sun starts to come up and you see a little dip there. But slowly as the sun rises, you need to pull in less and less from the grid. So you're slowing down how much power you need to pull in during that period. As in the afternoon, the sun gets stronger and stronger and stronger, you start to push energy back out on the grid. So during this whole morning period here, that would be considered your inflows, and your meter records that through its inflow register. In the afternoon, when you're putting power back onto the grid, that's your outflows, and that's recorded on your outflow register. Here's how it looks like from MyHydro. For those of you who have never set up your MyHydro account, it's a really good way to look at your energy consumption. And then if you do have a net metered system, you can also look at what your net in and outflows are. So here's a net outflow situation. So for a day, on this particular day, the bar graph is actually pointing down, which means throughout that whole day, a net amount of energy flowed out onto the grid. And you can see what that day looks like. Again, here's the morning where you have an inflow, and then all of a sudden in the afternoon, you have an outflow, and again, an inflow in the evening. But over the whole course of the day, the net result up here is a net outflow, and that would have been recorded on your meter. If in that billing period, you've gone through and you've recorded a net outflow, that credit gets advanced to the next billing period. So again, up here on the left-hand side, you see your typical meter readings. On a standard system without solar, you would have just one meter reading for your inflow. Once you join the net metering program, you end up with two meter readings, reading both your inflow and your outflow. The two are subtracted to determine how much you should pay for your energy. In this case, the inflow was 200 kilowatt hours and the outflow was 800. That's meaning they don't pay anything for the energy during that billing period because they were in a net outflow. And then down here, you can see that credit goes into your balance account to be applied to the next bill. So 600 kilowatt hours gets applied. It's not always an outflow situation, so sometimes you're just reducing the amount of your inflow. So in this case, you see the power flowing in during the day. Here's some morning loads, and then a little bit outflows in the afternoon, and then more inflows in the evening. And this day results in a net inflow. So that net inflow would then be put onto your what would be recorded through your meter. And here's the situation now. Here's your inflow register up here. So you see 1,200 kilowatt hours of inflows during this period and only 200 kilowatt hours of outflows. So in this situation, there would be kilowatt hours to be billed, which the 1,200 minus the 200 minus another 100 from the previous bill, like we showed, that can get banked. So you only have to pay on 900 kilowatt hours. So you've reduced the amount that you need to pay by both your outflows and the credit from your previous bill. Now, if we looked at how that looks for someone with a solar system over the year, there would be net outflows and net inflows throughout the year. When you sum those up, the net outflows are typically less than the net inflows. So that would leave you with still an amount to pay annually. If the net energy output exceeds that annual load, then you would have a annual credit on your bill that's what BC Hydro pays you out at. So let's move on to a bit about the announcement, and that really has to do with that annual load and annual energy output. First thing to make sure that everybody's clear on for the announcement is that existing customers are not affected, and that's clearly in the BC Hydro paper once you open it up. It says these amendments will not impact customers currently under the RS 1289, which is the net metering rate. So if you put in a system a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, all those systems are not affected by this announcement. They'll just continue on to do whatever they're going to do. And then new applications that are what we call right-sized. So that's where your annual load is greater than your annual output of your solar system. Those are also not going to run into any issues. The only question comes up is when we start to overproduce and what's going to happen with those. And that's why BC Hydro has put out this announcement so that they can address some of the situations that they're seeing out there from some customers. When we talk about the annual energy output, so this is, how big can you make your solar system? In the announcement, they've actually given a formula, and you can see it off to the left-hand side here. For solar systems, it's based on the inverter capacity. So you would take what your inverter is rated at, not your solar system, what your inverter is rated at, and then they make an energy calculation based on the size of that inverter. So if you've sized your inverter and solar system accordingly, you can calculate what your estimated annual energy output would be for the system that can fit onto your home. And then you can compare that to your load and see if you need to reduce your system size or if you can increase it. And here's an example of that. This is off of the BC Hydro website, is households in BC's service area average 900 kilowatt hours per month, which over a 12-month period is 10,800 kilowatt hours a year. So that's what the typical annual load would be for a standard household. And then if you looked at how much solar you could put on, so in this example, I used a 10 kilowatt inverter. A 10 kilowatt inverter is quite large for most homes. So that would be on the big side for a home. And then if you run that 10 kilowatt inverter through their formula, that comes out to be about 8,760 kilowatt hours a year. So that's your annual energy output. So you can see now that the annual load is less than the annual energy output. And if this system was sent into net metering, it would pass the criteria, and therefore you would be awarded a net metering contract and you could go ahead. The annual load is typically determined by your bills, so you don't go by this average. You would actually sum up the previous 12 months of energy, and that's what you would be using for your annual load. And then you would make your calculation based on your inverter size, and that's how you determine if your system can go ahead or if it needs to be adjusted. So here's what that example would look like over the year. So you have the energy collected or produced by your solar array, so that 8,760 kilowatt hours, and then you have how much is consumed, and the net result is still a net inflow. So that's what makes this a successful applicant for the way the program has been proposed to be changed. And you can see that up here in the graph. So you have inflows in the winter time where the load is much higher than the production, and then you might have outflows in the summertime, but they're very small, and so the net result is still that you have inflows from the grid. Another example would be is if you took that same load, so you calculated out your load and you were 10,800 kilowatt hours, but you wanted to put a 100 kilowatt inverter on that system. You work that out and your annual energy output is now 87,000 kilowatt hours, which is much larger than the annual load. Therefore, this system would not be allowed. And that's one of the intents of the announcement, is to try and prevent, this sort of thing, because it's not the intent of the program. The intent is to reduce this annual load amount, not to be an energy producer. And again, that's how this would look. You're producing 87,000 kilowatt hours from that 100 kilowatt inverter, and you're only consuming 10,000. So you're going to have a net outflow of the year for 76,000 kilowatt hours. If this was a system today, BC Hydro has to pay out this 76,000 kilowatt hours based on the standing offer rate of 9.99. And that's what they're trying to prevent. So this type of system would not be allowed in the future. Some things that we think that need to be clarified going forward. BC Hydro has put in a statement where they say they may accept a load estimate for the annual load instead of looking at just your 12 months of historical billing. And there would be some cases where it's a new home or a new building. In some of those instances, I know for new homes with the step code, we're going to have an energy model done. So I'm sure that might be something that, we can clarify that, if you were building a new home and you wanted to put solar on, can you just submit your energy model along with your solar estimate, and then that would qualify you. As well as if you were putting a solar system on your home and you wanted to add some large loads. The most common one is the electric vehicles. We see a lot of people who want to add solar systems, but are also at the same time adding electric vehicle. So their 12 months of history won't reflect that added load of the electric vehicle, which is quite a large load. So we want to make sure that there are some methodologies in place to estimate, known loads like electric vehicles. The other thing is the anniversary date. Right now, that's when BC Hydro determines if you have an annual access, like I pointed out earlier. So on that date, if you have an annual access, that's where they choose to pay you out or carry that amount forward. These dates can be random, and they should all be either moved to the spring when it's more likely that you're going to be using up that energy, or you should have the choice of when that anniversary date can be. Another thing is energy sharing. So community systems. That's one of the things that we hope that can be looked at, because if you can't oversize your system, which is I think what a lot of communities were doing, and then sharing that access credit in the community, if we have some ability to do that through community systems, would be very helpful. What are the next steps? We want to make sure that whatever we do we don't jeopardize the current program. We do have a really, really good net metering program here in BC, and we want to keep that going. We don't want to do anything that could alter the net metering program. And when we compare BC's net metering program to other provinces, there are really a lot of advantages to the way it is set up currently, even with the proposed changes. That's actually pretty normal. So for me, it's not something that we want to jeopardize the program, and these changes aren't that big of a deal. We do need to gather further stakeholder concerns because there's a lot of people in a lot of different areas in BC that might have different opinions on how the program's running, and then seek clarification on the gray areas that I talked about previously. So how we deal with new buildings, how we deal with added loads, and the anniversary date. I suggest submitting comments to the BCUC. That's usually done through an association like the BC SEA. So if you are a member, that's where you should seek to get your feedback heard. And the future, what we were told is that the Ministry of Energy and Mines is developing an energy roadmap, and it's pretty important to make sure that net metering is included in that. And a lot of the communities and stakeholders' concerns are voiced and put into that energy roadmap. So if there's any questions, I can field those now, and if not, we can go from there.
Hi, Ed. Thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it. We do have a bunch of questions coming up. So, and if everybody else just wants to put in your questions now, we can absolutely ask them on your behalf. Just give us a minute to get what we have organized here, and we'll ask them in just a second.
And just to remind everybody, that's on your little control panel off to the side is where you type in your questions. You'll see a window there to type in questions.
Hi, Ed. Okay, this one is from Darcy. What would be the situation for someone who has been approved to go ahead with a net metering install before the announcement, but has not had the install completed yet?
Yeah, if you've received your approval, then you're clear to install per anything prior to the announcement. So you're good to go. You don't have to worry. That's once you've received that email, you're considered approved to proceed under how you applied.
And a follow-up to that one. In another scenario, if a home is close to net zero consumption, what if there ends up being excess power generated?
Yeah, it's fine. They're not proposing to change the way and this is where it's actually really beneficial. So I'm glad you raised that question. If you do the calculation that we did right back here, and you did this calculation, and your system then passes the test, essentially, if you want to call it that. You install the system.
Here for a second.
Pardon? And
sorry about that.
If you install the system and there is an energy excess output, then it still falls under the existing regulation, which means you're paid out for that energy. And a good example might be is something might happen, you base it on your 12 months of history, and then something changes within your home. You decide to go on sabbatical for 6 months, for example, and you leave your solar system on, but you shut off your hot water tank and heat and stuff like that. That will, of course, affect your load, and you would probably end up in an annual excess for that year, but you will get the credit for that at the end of the year.
Okay, here comes another one. I'm trying to just get through it here. The original legislation on the site, the statement says the excess will be paid out at 9.99 cents a kilowatt hour. Therefore, the intent was to generate power. Nothing about the intent of the program not to pay out. I'm not sure about the question, but what is, I guess.
Well, let me answer that in a different way. So the intent of the program is to reduce load. So one of the benefits we have in BC is that the annual power is paid out. If we compare to other jurisdictions, the annual energy is actually zeroed out. So for example, let's pick Saskatchewan. On your anniversary date in Saskatchewan, if you have excess kilowatt hours built up, they get just reduced to zero. There's no payout or anything like that. The payout is only a bonus. The real intent of the program is to reduce your energy consumption, and actually that's where the real benefit is. When you're reducing your energy consumption, you're reducing that step 2 rate first, and that's the higher rate. So that's the one you want to actually focus on reducing.
Do we know how many systems there are and how many generated in excess?
My understanding is, I did have the number, but I don't have it handy here, but there's not a lot of PV systems in excess generation. There's a very few. There is other technologies that are part of the net metering program, and they may be the ones that are in excess, but it is very few. But becoming more common, is my understanding, is through the application process, as BC Hydro is seeing more applications being put in where the generation system is a lot higher than the load.
Okay. There's a lot of other questions here, but we're just answering them on an individual level right now. So if anybody else has some more questions that they would like to get them in now. Otherwise, we will respond to you through email. Ed, thank you so much for your presentation today, and thank you everybody for joining us. We hope this has solved a few of your questions about the upcoming changes, and we will be recording this, we have recorded this, and we will be posting it on our YouTube channel hopefully by the end of the day. So again, Ed, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for coming.